Hello, guys and gals, and this is part 46 of our reading of Rod Serling's Twilight Zone, 26 Unforgivable Explorations into the Realm of the Supernatural, adapted by Walter B. Gibson, and we're going to go over the copyright information, which is on your screen right now. Says Rod Serling's The Twilight Zone is copyright 1963 by Cayuga Productions Incorporated, and Rod Serling's Twilight Zone Revisited is copyright 1964 by Cayuga Productions Incorporated, all rights reserved. This 1983 edition is published by Bonanza Books, distributed by Outlet Book Companies Incorporated, a Random House company, and all that. The address is there if you want it. This book was previously published as two separate works entitled Rod Serling's The Twilight Zone and Rod Serling's Twilight Zone Revisited, published and bound in the United States of America, and they... Library of Congress information is there if you want it. Anyways, in this last time we started reading the 16mm Shrine, and Barbara Trenton wants to shut out the world, the current world, and live in the past. And so now she has met her old co-star, who is no longer really into acting, and we're going to find out what he does now. Okay, let's see, where was that? No, Barbie, Jerry laughed. I gave up acting long ago. It went down the drain with my youth. So, you don't act anymore? What do you do? I run a chain of supermarkets outside of Chicago. There's a dream that really came true, Barbie. Why, they haven't even thought of supermarkets. They didn't know what the word meant back when we were in pictures together, and now, dreams that come true? Barbara Jean's eyes took on a distant stare that matched her strained tone. I have dreams too, and I can renew them. I can wish myself where I want to be and stay there with people who are still alive. Her gaze was focused on Jerry now. You are one of them, and you are alive, the way you were. But as you are now, you are dead like all the others. She turned to include Danny in her glance. Go away, both of you. Jerry Herndon hesitated, then stepped forward and kissed Barbara Jean's cheek, and she turned her face away. With a hopeless shrug, Jerry walked from the study, and Danny Weiss reluctantly followed while Sally was showing the two visitors out. Barbara Jean strode rapidly and determinedly across the huge hall and into the projection room. There she flicked a switch. The room went dark. Soft romantic music accompanied the color film that unfolded on the screen. The screen was a penthouse terrace. Barbara Jean Trenton appeared in an evening gown, a young Barbara Jean, but almost the image of the Barbara Jean who watched from the seat in the projection room. Then into the scene stepped a slim, sleek Jerry Herndon, attired in a form-fitting tuxedo. The contrast between her youthful Jerry and his portly counterpart, who had just left the Trenton mansion, was a thing that passed belief. Neither could have been identified as a reasonable facsimile of the other. From the terrace, the girl studied the glow of Manhattan that never changed. Even though the city's buildings might come and go, perhaps that inspired the words that she spoke to the man beside her. You arranged all those lights just for me, Arnold. Of course, the man replied, and at 12 o'clock they will all spell your name, Lillian. With two L's, I hope. Coyly, Lillian drew away from Arnold's arms. Then, that is how New York should always be seen. From high above, not down in the streets where everyone scurries back and forth. Here it is like music. Great music. I shall give you music, replied Arnold. Skyline music. All for you, with love for me. Barbara Jean flicked off the film. Soon another reel was running, with the same people, but a different scene. Or were they the same people? The scene was World War I, and the American girl in a nurse's uniform was truly Barbara Jean Trenton. But Jerry Herndon as a young Italian officer, could have never been mistaken for Jerry Herndon of today. So it is goodbye again, he was saying. We should be used to goodbyes. I used to think when I was a little boy. You used to think, what, Tony? The nurse interrupted. I love to hear you talk about when you were a little boy. I'm jealous of those years, Tony. Oh, Adele, my darling. They were lost in an embrace, and in the wordless interim, the living Barbara Jean Trenton rose from her seat in the projection room and spoke to her filmed counterpart. There you are, Jerry. How well you looked. How young. How wonderfully young. But there was a fat old man here a while ago who said he was you. Oh, Jerry, my real Jerry. I wish I could go where you are. I wish I could, Jerry. Rising music drowned her voice, but it was drowned. Rising music drowned her voice, but it drowned the voices on the screen figures too. Barbara Jean Trenton was impressing her own self upon the screen. Her screen self of Adele, just as the Tony of the picture was absorbing last vestige of Jerry Herndon. The projector kept on while the film shuddered. The door to the projection room opened. Sally entered with a tray that held a coffee pot and a plate of sandwiches. She looked about the room and spoke timidly. Miss Trenton, I brought you a little snack. Wouldn't you like some coffee or some sandwiches? There was no response. Remembering what Danny had said about eyes becoming used to the darkness, Sally looked steadily at the screen. Her eyes went wide. She dropped the tray with a shriek. Dashing out of the projection room, Sally ran squarely into the arms of Danny Weiss. I came back, Sally, exclaimed Danny, to see how she was taking it. How is she, Danny? How was she, Sally? Speechless, Sally could only point to the projection room. Danny entered with Sally close behind her. There on the screen, Danny saw a scene that he knew well, but had never viewed in movies before. It was the front door of this very mansion. Approaching it were actors of the 1930s, headed by Jerry Herndon, as he had looked in those days. With him were others who had starred with Barbara Jean Trenton back in the same period. But what were they doing here, pouring into the ornate marble hallways, not just seeking attendance, but craving it? The camera was now centered on the marble staircase, and there, descending in majestic fashion, was Barbara Jean Trenton. Mere sight of her in that film brought a sharp cry from Danny. Barbie, please, Barbie, come back. There was a reason for those words. That Barbie on the screen was the Barbara Jean Trenton of today, not the version of 30 years ago. She was wearing her black toreador and white blouse, but she looked more glamorous than ever. They were crowding about her, those forgotten figures of a former era, acknowledging her as their queen. Barbara Jean Trenton had gone back into pictures exactly as she wanted. She had wished the impossible into becoming true. She had turned her projection room into a 16mm shrine, where she could welcome all those she remembered into a happy, fantastic realm of the Twilight Zone. And now we are ready for The Ghost of the Jolly Roger. Please hold just a sec. The Ghost of the Jolly Roger. Hangman's Bay was named in honor of Governor Roger Crisp, who turned it from a pirate haven into a thriving colonial possession. Overlooking both bay and sea was Crisp's stronghold, Fort Defiance, which stood on a rocky promontory above a parade ground where Crisp publicly hanged his victims as an example to all seafaring folk who might yield to the lure of piracy. The well-protected harbor had a settlement along its shore, while the waterfront was backed with green jungle slopes that rose to distant blue hills. Those were dominated by Mount Mogombo, a live volcano that frequently smoked by day and flared by night, but otherwise confined itself to ominous rumblings and an occasional scattering of ashes. Here, in the late 1600s, Crisp himself had thrived as a pirate, usually taking sides with one or another of the big nations that were constantly at war. Crisp had gained the nickname of Jolly Roger because his cadaverous countenance bore a striking resemblance to the skull and crossbones of the familiar pirate flag, particularly when he folded his long bony arms across his chest, beneath his chin. But when the various powers had finally combined their efforts to stamp out piracy, Crisp hauled down his banner and ran up a flag of truce instead. I'm against bloodshed, Crisp had announced, and if you make me the governor of a colony with a proper flag to fly for my masthead, I'll prove it. I'll talk my old comrades out of their wicked ways, and if there are those who won't listen, I'll fight them and get rid of them. Without bloodshed, mind you, or at least very little. A deal was made whereby the reformed pirate named Roger Crisp of the colony of Cape Regal, a name which soon gave way to Hangman's Bay, for Governor Crisp had very persuasive ways of handling pirates without bloodshed. If they wouldn't reform, he went after them with so many ships that he overawed them and forced their surrender with promise of a fair trial. Such trials always resulted in the prisoner being hanged, so none of them lived to warn other pirates not to trust their former comrade, Roger Crisp. But from the way that captured corsairs vanished from circulation, it became certain that something was amiss, so those at large gradually shied away from Hangman's Bay and its new governor. For years, the inhabitants of Hangman's Bay went along with Governor Crisp. Though no longer a pirate, he still was known as Jolly Roger because of the pleasure he took whenever a judge found a new crew guilty. Always they appealed to the governor for amnesty, and when Crisp announced, "Appeal denied," from his thin lips, his thin lips spread like a skull-like grin that symbolized death. At the executions, Crisp put on a show that really won the riffraff at Cape Regal. Poles were set up on the parade grounds like the masts of a ship, so that condemned men could be hoisted to the yardarm. Having met their doom, they were left to dangle until a new crop of culprits were brought in for trial. Just before every multiple hanging, the crowd would look toward the salty port that opened into the parade ground. There was a chance that a messenger might dash out bearing a reprieve, for the guardroom could be reached by a bell cord from the governor's apartment, 3 floors above. When no messenger appeared, all eyes rose to the governor's apartment, 3 floors above, to see that Crisp himself might have to say. Never did Governor Crisp fail them. Attired in a full and gorgeous uniform, he would appear at the window with folded arms, his sunken leering face, and bony hands. A living representation of the skull and crossbones, a mere gesture from Jolly Roger would have stayed the execution, but it never came. Gloating, Crisp watched the hangings from a vantage point on level with the struggling victim, his grin unchanged. So it continued over the years until the brig Falcon sailed into Hangman's Bay, flying a pirate flag. Governor Crisp observed the ship from a watchtower and stalked back along the parapet to his own quarters, where he pulled the single cord to the guardroom. Men rushed out to the parade ground and fell into immediate formation, while others dashed up 3 flights of zigzag stairs to receive the governor's personal instructions. "Arrest them at the dock," Crisp ordered, "and tell them their case will be judged fairly. Learn all you can, for whatever they say will be used against them. But do not mention that fact." The Falcon's crew were men who had been pressed into service by a notorious pirate named Tukes. Once there was enough of them, they had overpowered Tukes and killed him, along with his loyal followers. They had been put into Hangman's Bay. As their leaders expressed it, we'd rather be tried for mutiny than piracy. After hearing the case, 3 judges decided that the crew was guilty of mutiny only, and justified so. That was when Governor Crisp arose in all his pomp. Mutiny is the same as piracy, he stormed, and piracy is never justified. The verdict of the courts is overruled. I declare these men guilty of piracy. They are sentenced to death by hanging. By execution day, however, the populace had turned against Governor Crisp. Their mutterings grew uglier and louder than the distant rumblings of Mount Mogombo. If Jolly Roger could twist mutiny into piracy, he could twist mere insubordination into mutiny, making any trivial misdemeanor into a capital offense. A capital crime, rather. Alarmed by the public attitude, Jed Hervey, the deputy governor, brought word to Jolly Roger that a riot might start on the parade grounds. Order out the guard and have all other available men in reserve, Crisp stormed. But no bloodshed, mind you, if it can be avoided, he added with his most cadaverous smile. For treason also carries the death penalty with a verdict in advance. He dismissed the deputy and poured himself a mug of bumbo, a fiery mixture of spiced rum with a sprinkling of flaked coconut. Crisp always insisted that it was brimstone straight from Mount Mogombo, Mount Mogombo, whose smoking peak was framed in the window overlooking the parade ground. So Jed Hervey left Jolly Roger mumbling over his bumbo and went back to the guardroom, where he ordered out half of the 100 men he found there. He pushed back the crowd on the parade ground, and the prisoners were brought up from the dungeon. The crowds quieted to hear what the doomed men had to say. When we were pirates, we should have stayed so, one shouted. Jolly Roger hates bloodshed, and now I wish we'd shown him some by sticking his soldiers like so many pigs. That goes for Jolly Roger, too, another agreed. He thinks we're going to die with our boots on. We'll make a liar out of him, and now. With that, the men kicked off their boots, and his dozen comrades did the same, while the crowd really roared approval and surged forward despite the soldiers. Hervey promptly settled that by calling out all the reserves, leaving the fort deserted except for Jolly Roger in his apartment 3 floors up. The mob retreated, and the ropes were affixed about the necks of the prisoners. Again, there was a lull, and one of the prisoners shouted up at Crisp's window. You're a doomed man, Jolly Roger. You are afraid to show yourself, because you know your fate will be like ours. Death is catching up with you. The crowd roared. Even Mogombo seemed to rumble approval. Jed Hervey looked to the salty port, hoping that a messenger would appear there, but none did. At the last moment, Hervey stared up at Crisp's window, positive that the governor would show himself, if only in response to the crowd's defiance. Hervey was willing to take any gesture on Crisp's part as a signal of reprieve, but for once there was no sign of Jolly Roger with his skull-like grin and gaudy uniform. The moment came, and the doomed crew were hauled, strangling to the yardarm, where their sightless eyes soon were staring at the empty window. The spell was broken, and the crowd, convinced that Jolly Roger had given way to fear, surged toward the entrance of the fort. Hervey managed to get inside with 6 men and clamped the salty port, leaving the rest of the soldiers to battle it out with the maddened populace. First to reach the governor's apartment was Jed Hervey halted on the threshold. There he saw Jolly Roger slumped against the oak table, the mug of bumbo in one hand, the bell cord to the guardroom in the other. His face was staring upward, and never had its skull-like grin been more frozen. The shouts of the crowd had risen to a mighty tumult, but His Excellency Roger Crisp showed no concern. Jolly Roger was as dead as the dangling figures outside his window. The situation was truly tragic. Apparently, the governor, for once, had decided to grant a reprieve and had tried to call the guardroom too late, for by then Hervey had summoned the reserves and the place was empty. Getting no response, Crisp had tried to rise and go to the window, but had succumbed from a heart attack through his own intensity over the excitement outside. Word was passing along that Jolly Rogers was dead, and the mob's antagonistic mood changed from one of celebration. All that night they danced in the streets of Cape Regal by the lurid gaze of Mogumbo, which supplied a timely eruption as its contribution to the festivities. The bodies of the Falcon's crew members had been lowered from the improvised yardarms, and now the rioters decided to hoist the corpse of Jolly Roger in their place. But before they could attack Fort Defiance, a series of earthquakes shook Cape Regal, demolishing half the town. Parts of the fort were damaged too, but Jed Hervey, now governor, put his men to work repairing the walls. Between quakes, he held a funeral for Jolly Roger and buried his coffin in a cemetery a few miles inland. Further tremors rocked the graveyard so that even the sight of the crypt was lost, but there were persons who claimed that Hervey had simply buried an empty casket there to mislead the angry populace. By then it was too late to matter. Fort Defiance was secure against the citizens of Cape Regal, for what was left of them were crawling out of the rubble, ready to take orders from Jed Hervey, a successor to Roger Crisp. The new regime did not last long, however. With Crisp gone, outside pressure caused Hervey to give up his authority. Cape Regal then became a simple colony that was occasionally swapped or seized by one big power or another. Fort Defiance was garrisoned in time of trouble, and during a century of social tranquility, it was practically abandoned. Then, when big cruise ships began bringing tourists to Hangman's Bay, the old fort was restored to a museum. People were taken on guided tours between the hours of 9 and 5, while at nights the fort was locked up from the outside. Among its fanciful legends was one of a ghost that stalked its parapets, thought to be the restless shade of the notorious Governor Crisp. But since no one was allowed in the place, there was no way of finding out, as the ghost was never known to stroll about by day. It took the progressive spirit of the atomic age to shake off the dust of decadent centuries. Nothing had happened at Cape Regal, and the people were so contented that it became obvious that something must be very wrong. So a vote was held throughout the surrounding region, and a former colony of Cape Regal overnight became the independent Republic of Mogumbo. That went off nicely because the mother country accepted the verdict and bowed out quite prettily. The Mogumbonians held another election, this time to choose their own president. There were 3 factions, and the vote was so close that all demanded a recount. When that was made, neither of the losers would accept it, and another election was scheduled. Meanwhile, members of each faction agreed among themselves that the only sure way to win would be to reduce the voting members of the opposing parties before election time. They went at it with the vim that made the old days of piracy look tame. All types of weapons, from poison darts to plastic bombs, were called into action, while modern tanks went clanking into ancient jungle pits. But before the warring groups managed to converge on Camp Regal itself, the United Nations flew in an emergency force which took over Hangman's Bay as a supply base under the command of Colonel Gandak, who headed a small picked force from India. Colonel Gandak promptly occupied Fort Defiance to prevent local factions from moving in there. More quotas arrived from other countries, and soon a very cosmopolitan group of officers and men were garrisoned in the ancient fort. There, Calvin Laxman, the custodian, who also served as curator, showed the officers around the place and related its history. Entering by the sally port, the guardroom was on the right, and according to Laxman, it had changed but little since the days of Governor Roger Crisp. If you measure the guardroom, declared Laxman, in his precise tone, you will find that it runs all the way to the west bastion, where new masonry was added to strengthen the wall. Carefully, Laxman paced off the distance, then stopped and eyed the wall through thick lens glasses, finally running his fingers over the masonry, as though to feel cracks in the mortar that his eyes could not detect. Colonel Gandak and the other officers who watched him agreed that a very fine job had been done. Okay, we need to stop that here. Still have quite a few pages here. Yeah. Anyways, we have been reading from Rod Serling's Twilight Zone, 26 Unforgettable Explorations into the Realm of the Supernatural, and it is adapted by Walter B. Gibson. And we have been reading the Ghost of the Jolly Roger. If you like this content, make sure you like and subscribe, ring the bell so you know when I upload. Also, support me in any way. If you want to join the Discord server, all information will be in the description below. As always, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.